Yeah, today's been amazing. Really, really good day.
Brilliant.
Loads of great sessions. I was personally involved in hosting the research gap session, which was talking about new medications that are coming
Yes,
on the market,
that's
the
right.
barriers to being in research groups. It was really, really, really informative, and the audience had like hundreds of questions, which was
Yes,
fantastic.
absolutely wonderful. What is from what you just said? What is one of the things that has stood out to you the most? If you could pick on one thing that has
I think
done that.
the lack of funds that goes into research in the
Okay,
area of bipolar has been
sure.
surprising for me to learn
Yes,
today, in honesty,
I can
to hear
imagine. Yeah,
from the professors, the people that are leading the research in this field, and to
that's right.
actually see how much or how little
Yes.
financial resource goes into research was surprising to me,
Wow.
especially when you're dealing with a condition that is so life threatening when
That's
left
right.
untreated.
Yes, and so popular, perhaps.
Mm, mm.
um, absolutely, absolutely. Another thing I was going to ask. So, how are your personal experiences helping you in terms of, or should I say, aiding you in how you approach those who may seek support from you, or those who are seeking support from you?
I mean, I've lived with bipolar now. I've been there's two parts to that. I've been
Yes.
affected by bipolar since I was a teenager,
Okay.
but I didn't learn that I had bipolar until I was 29.
Wow.
Um, so, in typical fashion, it took a long time for me to get diagnosed,
Yes.
which is quite typical for people with bipolar.
Yeah.
Um, and really, just through my own lived experience, I now mentor other people who
Yes.
live with bipolar to live a
Yes.
good life. But it's
That's
also
right.
understanding that in order to live well with bipolar, our lives do have to change because some
Yes.
things just don't work alongside bipolar. It's just the
Yes.
way it is. Um, but they are small sacrifices to make for a stable, more balanced life. And I
Absolutely.
really believe that. I live it, I walk it, I breathe it, I do it, I am it. And I
Yes.
know that with all the medication in the world, if I didn't change the way I live my life, I
Yes.
wouldn't be as stable as I am now.
Absolutely. And I think you just expressed it really well. The fact that you've owned it and have fully understood yourself
Mm.
as a human being who is where they are, and to say that I'm going to move on and make the best of life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just wonderful.
Mm.
How do you get when you're speaking? You said you get people to have perhaps a to get a better understanding of the whole situation condition, and therefore to help them live a good life. Could you break that down for us a little bit more, please?
One of the main things I believe is that we have to understand, make yourself the expert in the room on yourself, right? We
Yes,
have to understand what is part of our mental health condition and what is
that's
part
right.
of our conditioning, because we
Yes,
all come from very different backgrounds, very different lives. And those triggers that we have within our conditioned selves, our experiential selves,
yes,
will be fundamental in making us unwell
yes,
within our mental health conditions. So there's two parts of it. We have to get to know who we are and what we're about and how we react and how we deal with stress and what are our stresses, what are our triggers
that's right.
as a human being, as an individual, because when these happen, these will trigger us to have periods of being very unwell in our mental health condition. So, getting to know our condition versus our conditioning for me is absolutely vital in recovery. And
Definitely.
then there are just some bipolar basics like that just have to change when you learn that you're living with bipolar. I used to believe that I could beat it, I could win, I could be bigger than it. But that's not the case. I actually had to be humbled and understand that I have to cohabit. I have to befriend bipolar. I have to live with it. I have to respect it
Yes,
to live well.
that's right.
It's not a case of just getting better, smashing it, getting over, and never dealing with bipolar again. That just doesn't happen.
That's right.
So you have to become friends with bipolar and
Wow.
really respect
Yeah,
what you're living with
yeah,
to get the best out of your life.
that's right. I love the sentence. You have to become friends with bipolar.
Yeah.
And I think
Befriend bipolar for sure.
that's such an awesome way of explaining it or describing it, because you're saying, you know, we have to travel together. We are going to travel together, and there's no separating us. So we might as well just get on and know each other, right?
Absolutely. And I, as much as I have to get to know bipolar warts and all, I have to get to know myself warts and all, because my self, my individual self, which is different to everyone else that has bipolar, I will have different triggers to everyone else in my conditioned self. If I don't know what they are, then they will trigger me to be unwell in my bipolar. So it's essential.
Definitely. I think, once again, that's such a powerful thing, because what you're saying is other people may suffer from it, but you are unique, and therefore look at yourself from the perspective of your uniqueness. And as you said, what triggers you, what may bother you, when it's on its way, and everything else.
Exactly. It just exasperates the whole situation if you don't know. I've got bipolar, someone else might have bipolar, but how I deal with stress and how someone else deals with stress could be entirely different. And left unchecked with not enough self-awareness, then however that shows up for us can trigger us to go into a period of acute depression or hypomania, and then rolling over into mania, and that equals unstable, that equals very poorly. And I know that from experience, my own.
Definitely. And how do you teach a person to come to terms, or to honestly face themselves once they suspect they might have bipolar, or once they know? How do you get a person to kind of almost start to think about it positively?
I think the first thing is to give people the courage to be curious about themselves, and to be kinder to themselves as well. Give themselves grace for while they're learning these steps. And you will trip and fall as you learn these different steps, and you will trip and fall as you learn about yourself, and you will do things that don't help living with bipolar, and by doing them enough times you'll realize you end up in the same place, and eventually you come to the point where you realize that maybe if you change those things, it's not going to cure the fact that you've got bipolar, but it can certainly help. And it's like a layered it's a layered acceptance as well, because I went through a phase where I was very resentful, very angry that I had to change my life to cohabit with bipolar. And this is all normal, right? This didn't happen for me overnight. This happened for me over a number of years, where I gradually accepted that I had bipolar. It was staying with me forever. I had to befriend it and live with, and that took time. It took grieving, it took being angry, it took being sad, it took being cocky, it took being, me just being egotistical about it. It took all of those things for me to finally accept that I had to be humble and live with. And that does not happen overnight. And it happened for me by looking to people who were further down the road than me. It's useful to see people who are further down the journey than you are. It helps you to have perspective. It helps you to have hope. It helps you to believe that it can be okay.
Absolutely. Wow. And when you looked at other people who were further down the road, as you said, what was it that you took from them? Because as we touched on, it can be slightly different or very similar to another person, or it can be completely different. So what is it that you took from the other people that helped to enhance your experiences, or helped to, in a sense, confirm your suspicions? And how did you take that forward in terms of embracing the situation?
I mean, for me personally, the biggest shift for me came from attending one of the bipolar UK support groups in my town when I was living in the UK. And I had read some stuff online. I could gone online and I was reading blogs, reading other people's words. And yes, it's helpful. But for me, the most powerful thing was the connection to somebody else that really got it, that you look in the room and they go, yeah, me too, I get it. And that for me was incredibly powerful. And do you know what it does? It helps you to not feel ashamed of what you're going through and what you're living with. And also, I'd like to say with bipolar, some of the behaviors that can come out as a symptom of bipolar, that often leave people feeling very ashamed of their actions, ashamed of their behavior, because some of it can be very out of character and very extreme. And that is very difficult to deal with, especially in the early days. And when you don't understand what's going on, when you're frightened, when you are scared of your own self and you can't even trust your own self because you don't know what you're going to do next, it's a frightening space to be. And I can remember what that feels like. And I knew that I was suffering with depression. So I went to a depression support group, which I thought would kind of help me. And it did help me because they spoke to the lower side of my mood disorder. But I was waiting for the punchline. I was waiting for someone to say, yeah, but what about the days when you don't need any sleep? And what about the days when you're this and everyone's too slow and you're angry and you're this and you're that? And no one said it. And in this depression support group, people were saying, oh, I just love to wake up one day with loads of energy. And I'm sitting there thinking, I think I'm in the wrong place, because I do feel like that sometimes, right? And so anyway, it was a bit bizarre. But anyway, then I realized I turned up to the wrong party, basically. And this wasn't the place for me. And it was a place for me part of the time. And then I found the Bipolar UK support group, and I went in and I sat around and I was really nervous, because there was also a part of me thinking, if I'm here, saying that I've got bipolar, then that must mean that I'm really crazy, right? Because this isn't just depression, and I don't want to downplay depression. Depression is awful and it can lead to being suicidal, and it's a terrible space to be in. Bipolar is different. But it did have a bit of stigma attached to being like, you're really crazy, right? And so I went in that room and I was a bit afraid to meet other people with bipolar. I was a bit afraid of what I would be confronted with. And I sat in the room and people started doing their shares and sharing some of their experiences over I think it was a 2-weekly group that they'd gone through in the last 2 weeks. And I started thinking, oh, actually, yeah, I can kind of relate to what they're saying. And then I shared something that I had done when I had been particularly high that I didn't feel that proud of. And I looked up, I'd said it with my head down. And as I looked up, people were just nodding their heads and going, yeah, I get it. It happens. I've done stuff like that too. And I just thought, you know what? I found my tribe, and I felt lighter. I felt like I could breathe. I felt seen, heard, understood. And I didn't feel like I was a crazy person. I felt like, actually, I'm okay. And then I was looking around at the group leader, who seemed to really be quite together. And I was thinking, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do this too, right? So it gave me hope.
Brilliant. And my last question, you mentioned something that you said. You mentioned anger or being angry. Was the anger towards yourself, or was it towards other people around you?
Well, there's two parts of that. I had a lot of anger in terms of accepting my diagnosis, because it made me feel cross and resentful and bitter and entitled to the fact that I shouldn't have to change my life for this illness, and I shouldn't have to live with it. And why has this happened to me? And all of that. I had a lot of that. I don't have that now, but I certainly did have that when I was going through the layers of accepting that I would have to live with this forever.
Definitely.
It's a big pill to swallow. And then the other part of the anger comes through, for me, normally when I'm in a hypermanic or on the higher side of life, in the bipolar mood disorder, where I get quite cross, quite short, quite impatient with people. I believe that everyone's going too slow, that they're the problem and I'm not. I can't understand why they can't think this quickly. Why can't they keep up? And that is a symptom of being on the higher side of this mood disorder, which I know anyone listening to this who has bipolar will relate to that, I'm sure. And it can make you very aggressive, when you get into the realms of tipping over into mania. You can become very unreasonable, very argumentative. You know, I can think back to times when I would have argued with a paper bag given half the chance for no reason. You know, these things are, they're part of it. It can happen, right? And so so that's my answer. There's two parts to that.
That's right. Wow, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your thoughts, the way you're helping other people, the way you're owning it and making the best of life. I think it's really inspirational, and I really hope that those watching take something or a lot of things away from what you said.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.